I never thought I'd be the guy posting his life story on the internet, but when your entire world implodes over the course of a single Tuesday afternoon, you realize that some secrets are just too heavy to carry around by yourself. My name is Ethan. I'm 32, I live just outside of Chicago, and up until about 3 months ago, I thought I had everything completely figured out. I had a decent job in mid-level tech management, a beautiful 3-bedroom house with a wraparound porch in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and a wife named Maya whom I loved more than life itself. Maya and I had been married for 4 years, together for 7, and our relationship was the kind of steady, comfortable partnership that people always told us they envied. We didn't really fight. We just coasted along on a shared wavelength of inside jokes, weekend trips to Michigan, and plans for a future that seemed entirely mapped out. Then came Leo. Leo had been my absolute best friend since our freshman year at Ohio State. We were the classic duo, the guys who survived terrible dorm food, broke college budgets, and all the messy, chaotic breakups of our 20s together. When we graduated, I went the corporate route, settled down, and started looking for stability. Leo went the chaotic route. He was a freelance graphic designer who chased every shiny object, hopped from apartment to apartment, and lived with a kind of reckless freedom that I sometimes envied from behind my desk. But about 6 months ago, Leo hit a wall. A massive contract fell through, his landlord in the city doubled his rent, and he found himself backed into a corner with maxed-out credit cards and nowhere to go. When he called me from a diner parking lot, sounding completely defeated, I didn't even hesitate. I looked at Maya across the kitchen island, told her Leo was in trouble, and she immediately nodded. She was always like that, generous, empathetic, and always willing to open our home. We agreed he could sleep on our basement pull-out couch for a few weeks until he got back on his feet. I drove into the city that same night, loaded up his life into the back of my SUV, and brought him home. I remember looking at him in my rearview mirror, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, and feeling a deep sense of pride that I was in a position to help my brother out. The first few weeks were great. Having Leo around felt like a throwback to our college days. We'd crack open beers after I got off work, fire up the grill on the patio, and watch late-night basketball games while Maya sat on the opposite end of the couch, laughing at our stupid banter. He was a respectful house guest, too. He kept his space clean, always offered to buy groceries when his meager freelance checks came in, and walked our golden retriever, Jax, when Maya and I were busy. He fit into our routine so seamlessly that the few weeks deadline we had initially set just sort of dissolved. 1 month turned into 2, and 2 turned into 4. It became normal to see his sneakers by the front door and hear the low hum of his music coming from the basement. But looking back now, with the agonizing clarity that only comes after devastation, I can see exactly when the tectonic plates of my life began to shift. It didn't happen with a massive explosion. It happened in tiny, almost imperceptible fractions. It was the way Maya started dressing a little nicer, even on days when she was just working from her home office. It was the way the house seemed a little too quiet when I walked in after a long commute, only for the two of them to emerge from the kitchen laughing about some joke I wasn't a part of. It was the way Leo started staying upstairs later into the evening, sitting at our dining table with his laptop while Maya cooked dinner, their voices falling into a rhythm that felt entirely separate from me. I dismissed it all because I trusted them blindly. Why wouldn't I? One was the woman I had sworn to spend the rest of my life protecting, and the other was the guy who had held my hair back when I drank too much at 21. They were the 2 pillars of my existence. I even remember telling myself how lucky I was that my wife and my best friend got along so well. I'd heard horror stories from guys whose wives hated their college buddies, and I counted my blessings that my home was a peaceful, harmonious sanctuary. The cracks only started showing in my own mind about a week before everything shattered. I came home from a particularly stressful budget meeting at work, exhausted and craving nothing more than a quiet evening with Maya. When I walked through the garage door, I found them in the living room. Leo was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the couch, and Maya was sitting on the cushions directly above him. Her fingers were lightly running through his hair, a casual, intimate gesture that she usually reserved only for me when I was stressed. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, they both froze. Maya jumped slightly, pulling her hand back and smoothing out her skirt with an awkward, hurried motion. Leo didn't look back at me right away. He just cleared his throat and stood up, stretching as if nothing had happened. Maya gave me a bright, almost manic smile and asked how my day was, her voice a full octave higher than usual. I asked her what she was doing, trying to keep my tone light, and she laughed it off, saying Leo had a massive headache and she was just trying to help him relax. Leo chimed in, thanking her casually before slipping away downstairs. I stood there in the middle of my own living room, looking at my wife, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt a cold, sharp knot of unease tighten in my stomach. I wanted to say something, to demand to know why she was touching my best friend like that, but a wave of intense guilt immediately washed over me.
I was being paranoid, I told myself. They were just close. They were family now. I was projecting my own work stress onto my marriage. I kissed her forehead, apologized for being tense, and went to bed early. Then came that fateful Tuesday. I was supposed to fly out to Columbus, Ohio for a 3-day regional conference. My flight was booked for 2 p.m. I kissed Maya goodbye at 10 in the morning while she was sitting at her laptop in the kitchen. She hugged me tightly, told me she'd miss me, and reminded me to text her when my plane landed. Leo was out running errands, so I didn't get to see him before I left, but I didn't think twice about it. I drove to O'Hare, parked my car in the economy lot, dragged my suitcase through Terminal 1, and made it all the way to my gate. I was sitting in one of those uncomfortable terminal chairs, working through some emails on my phone, when an announcement crackled over the PA system. Due to severe weather tracking across the Midwest and a technical malfunction with our aircraft, the flight to Columbus was canceled. The gate agent announced that the next available flight wouldn't be until noon the following day. I sighed, rubbed my tired eyes, and looked at my phone. It was 1:15 p.m. I could either book a hotel near the airport or just drive the 45 minutes back home, sleep in my own comfortable bed, and head back out the next morning. It wasn't even a real choice. I wanted my bed, and more than that, I wanted to surprise Maya.
I imagined the look of relief on her face when I walked back through the door, giving us an unexpected bonus night together. I grabbed my bag, took the shuttle back to the parking lot, and got into my car. The drive back to the suburbs felt incredibly mundane. The sun was shining, traffic was light, and I remember listening to a podcast about sports analytics, completely oblivious to the fact that every mile I drove was bringing me closer to the absolute demolition of my reality. I pulled into our subdivision around 2:15 p.m. As I turned down our street, I noticed Leo's battered old sedan was parked in the driveway, which was normal. What wasn't normal was that Maya's car was pulled all the way into the garage, but the garage door had been left wide open. I parked at the curb, not wanting to block Leo in case he needed to leave later. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and walked up the driveway. The house was quiet, surrounded by the perfectly manicured lawns of our neighbors. I walked into the garage, pressed the button on the wall to close the heavy overhead door behind me, and stepped up to the mudroom entrance. I didn't use my keys because I didn't want the chime of the security system to give me away. I wanted to walk into the kitchen and just surprise her while she was working. I unlocked the deadbolt silently, turned the handle, and stepped inside. The house was completely dark down here, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. The only sound was the low, steady drone of the central air conditioning. I set my suitcase down on the soft rug of the mudroom, taking extreme care not to let the wheel squeak. I kicked off my dress shoes, standing in my socks, and walked toward the kitchen. It was empty. Her laptop was sitting closed on the island, a half-empty mug of coffee resting beside it. I figured she was upstairs taking a nap or reading a book, so I began walking toward the staircase in the foyer. But as I reached the bottom step, I heard a sound that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was a faint, muffled laugh coming from upstairs. It wasn't the sound of someone watching a video or talking on a work call. It was an intimate, breathy sound that I recognized instantly because I had heard it in the quietest, most private moments of my life. It was Maya's laugh, but it held a cadence I hadn't heard in years. And then, cutting through the silence of the house, came a man's voice, low, rumbling, and unmistakable. It was Leo. My heart didn't just speed up. It felt like it physically dropped into the lower half of my chest, turning into a heavy, freezing block of ice. My breath hitched in my throat. I stood frozen on the bottom step, one hand gripping the wooden banisters so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. My brain, desperately trying to protect me from the monstrous truth, scrambled for any other explanation. Maybe they were looking at a project upstairs? Maybe something in the guest room needed fixing, but the air in the house felt different. It felt heavy with a secret, thick and suffocating. I began to climb the stairs. Every single step felt like I was lifting 1,000 pounds of lead. I kept my weight to the edges of the steps, knowing exactly which floorboards creaked in our old house. I moved like a ghost, a stranger invading my own home. As I reached the top landing, the sounds became distinct, tearing away every single shred of denial I had left to cling to. They weren't in the guest room. They weren't in Leo's basement apartment. They were in our master bedroom. The door, which was usually kept wide open during the day, was pulled shut, leaving only a tiny quarter-inch crack of golden light spilling out onto the hallway carpet. I approached the door, my entire body shaking so violently that I was terrified they would hear the fabric of my clothes rustling. I pressed my face close to the gap, my eyes straining to adjust to the dim light of the bedroom. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn, blocking out the Tuesday afternoon, creating an artificial night. Through the narrow slit of the doorframe, I saw our bed. The white linen sheets that Maya and I had picked out together at a boutique in Chicago were tangled and messy. And there they were. Maya was sitting up against the headboard, her hair uncharacteristically wild, wrapped in nothing but the silk robe I had bought her for our last anniversary.
Leo was sitting right next to her, his bare back exposed to me, his arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She was leaning her head against his chest, her eyes closed, a look of absolute serene contentment on her face that I hadn't seen in God knows how long. He was murmuring something softly into her ear, his lips brushing against her skin, and she let out that same low, breathless laugh I had heard from downstairs. He reached down, took her hand, and kissed her knuckles, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of pure, established familiarity. This wasn't a sudden mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was an ongoing, deeply comfortable relationship happening right under my roof, on the bed I slept in every single night. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. I couldn't breathe. The hallway seemed to spin, the walls closing in on me until the air felt hot and thin. The two people I loved most in this world, the two people I had given everything to, were casually destroying me in the room where I laid my head. I felt a primitive, roaring urge to kick the door off its hinges, to scream until my lungs burst, to tear Leo apart with my bare hands. But as the hot surge of rage threatened to consume me, a cold, calculated wall of ice suddenly slammed down over my emotions. If I stormed in there now, it would be a messy screaming match. They would lie, they would minimize, they would gaslight me, and they would try to control the narrative. I would be the hysterical husband, and they would find a way to make me look crazy. No, I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I took a slow, agonizing step back away from the door, my eyes never leaving that sliver of light. I backed down the hallway, down the stairs, making absolutely no sound. I grabbed my suitcase from the mudroom, stepped back out into the garage, and walked out into the bright, mocking afternoon sun. I got back into my car, started the engine, and drove away from my house, my mind entirely blank, completely empty of everything except a cold, burning desire for total, absolute ruin. I drove for 3 hours without a destination. The suburban strip malls, the identical office parks, and the endless expanses of concrete along the interstate all blurred into a gray, featureless smear. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard that my fingers went completely numb, my mind trapped in a horrific loop of that single image, the tangled white sheets, the silk robe, his bare back. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear her low, breathless laugh echoing in the quiet cabin of my car. It was like a virus rewriting my entire history. Every memory I had of the last 4 months, every dinner we shared, every movie night, every time Maya hugged me when I came home from work, was completely poisoned. Eventually, the low fuel light flashed on my dashboard, snapping me out of my trance. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station off I-94, parked near the edge of the lot away from the pumps, and just sat there. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the asphalt. I looked at my phone. There were 3 text messages from Maya. The first one, from 3:15 p.m., read,
"Hey babe, just checking in. Did your flight land safe? Love you." The second one, from 5 p.m., asked if I was wrapped up in meetings. The third, sent just 20 minutes ago, was a photo of Jack sleeping on the living room rug with the caption, "We miss you already. Call me when you can." The sheer, calculated sociopathy of those messages made a physical wave of nausea wash over me. She had sent that first text probably minutes after I walked out of the house, while sitting in the very bed where she had just betrayed me. She was using our dog, our home, and our routine as a shield to keep me blind. It was a level of coldness I didn't think she was capable of. And Leo, the guy who had text-bombed me last week thanking me for letting him use my garage to fix his car, had been sleeping with my wife while eating the food I bought and living under the roof I paid for. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and let out a dry, ragged sob that tore at my throat. The pain was blinding, a visceral ache in the middle of my chest that felt like an actual physical wound. I wanted to text her back and scream. I wanted to call Leo and tell him to meet me in a parking lot so I could destroy him. But every time the urge to explode took over, that cold, detached survival instinct wrestled it down. If I reacted now, I would lose. I needed a plan. I needed to protect myself before they realized I knew. I called an old college friend named Marcus. Marcus wasn't part of our immediate circle anymore. He lived in downtown Chicago and worked as a high-end corporate litigation attorney. He was sharp, cynical, and completely disconnected from Leo. When he answered, his voice was loud and hurried, the background noise of a busy city restaurant humming through the line. "Ethan, what's up, man? Long time," he said. "Marcus," I managed to say, my voice cracking slightly. "I need help. I need a referral for the absolute best, most ruthless divorce attorney in the Chicago area, and I need it tonight." The noise on his end suddenly went quiet, as if he had stepped into a private hallway. "Ethan, what happened? Are you okay?" "Maya and Leo," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I caught them, in our bed. They think I'm in Ohio right now." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. Marcus didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me he was sorry. He immediately went into professional mode. "Where are you right now?" "In a gas station parking lot somewhere near Elgin," I said.
"Listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his tone dropping into a low, commanding register. "Do not go home. Do not text her back anything angry. If she texts you, give her a completely normal, boring response. Tell her your phone died or you were in a late dinner with clients. Do not give them a single hint that the trap door is about to open. I'm texting you a number right now. Her name is Sheila Vance. She's a partner at a firm downtown. She handles high net worth divorces and she's an absolute shark. I'm going to call her personal cell right now and tell her you're calling." "Thank you," I choked out. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said. "Right now, you are a ghost. You don't exist until you speak to Sarah. Go find a cheap hotel, paying cash if you can, so there's no immediate paper trail on a joint card, and do not log into any shared accounts tonight. Clear your head." We hung up, and a few seconds later, a contact card pinged onto my screen. I did exactly what Marcus told me to do. I drove to a nondescript business hotel near the highway, paid for a room with cash, and carried my suitcase up to the 4th floor. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stale air. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at the blank television screen, feeling completely untethered from reality. I forced my shaking hands to type a text to Maya. "Hey, sorry, meeting ran incredibly late and then we went out for drinks with the regional VP, going straight to sleep.
Talk tomorrow." Her reply was almost instant. "Oh, good. Glad it went well. Sleep tight, handsome. Kiss Jax for me in your thoughts." I turned the phone face down, a cold, hard shell completely encasing my art. The woman I loved was gone. The person occupying her body was a stranger, a dangerous adversary who was actively mocking my intelligence. The next morning, at exactly 8:30 a.m., I sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of the skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan. Sheila Vance sat across from me. She was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, with sharp gray eyes that seemed to read my thoughts before I even spoke them. I laid out everything: the house, the finances, Leo's arrival, and exactly what I had seen through the crack of the bedroom door the day before. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking neat notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and crossed her ankles.
The emotional part of this is devastating, Ethan, and I am genuinely sorry you have to go through it, she began, her voice calm and authoritative. But my job is to look at this as a business dissolution. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state. That means the court doesn't really care about the infidelity when it comes to dividing the assets. Her cheating doesn't automatically mean you get the house or that she gets nothing. My heart sank. So they just get away with it?
He lives in my house, sleeps with my wife, and she gets half of everything I worked for? A small, dangerous smile touched the corners of Sarah's mouth. I said the court doesn't care about the infidelity. However, the court cares very much about dissipation of marital assets. If she has been using your joint money to fund this affair, buying him gifts, paying for dinners, or if he has been living in your home rent-free while actively engaged in an extramarital relationship, we can use that. Furthermore, we need to look at the deed of the house and your premarital assets. Did you buy the house before you got married? I did, I said, a sudden spark of hope igniting in my chest. I bought it a year before the wedding. The down payment came entirely from an inheritance my grandfather left me. Maya's name was added to the title later when we refinanced 2 years ago. Sarah leaned forward, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. Good. That complicates things in our favor. But here is the most critical piece of advice I can give you right now. We need proof. A judge won't just take your word for what you saw through a door crack. If she denies it, it becomes a he said, she said situation. We need undeniable, concrete, digital and physical evidence of the duration and extent of the affair. If we have that, we can force a settlement that will make her think twice about dragging this through a public courtroom. How do I get that without them knowing? I asked.
You go back, Sarah said flatly. You fly back from your trip today, exactly when you were supposed to. You walk into that house, you hug your wife, you shake your friend's hand, and you act like the oblivious, happy husband. And while you are doing that, you hired the private investigator I'm about to recommend. You let them do their job. Can you do that, Ethan? Can you look them in the eye and pretend everything is normal for the next 2 weeks? I stared out the window at the gray waters of the lake, my chest tightening. The thought of walking back into that house, of smelling her perfume, of seeing Leo's fake, smiling face, made me want to tear my own skin off. But I thought about the sheer disrespect of what they had done. I thought about them laughing at me in my own bed. I can do it, I said, my voice dropping into a hard, venomous whisper. Tell me what I need to do. The flight back from Columbus that didn't happen was the hardest thing I've ever had to fake. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, the time my real return flight was scheduled to land. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but by the time I opened the car door, my face was a perfect mask of exhaustion. I walked through the mudroom, consciously making noise this time, letting the heavy door slam shut. Within seconds, Maya came around the corner. She was wearing a casual sweater and leggings, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, the picture of a cozy suburban wife. She smiled beautifully, jogging over to wrap her arms around my neck. "You're home," she breathed, burying her face in my shoulder. The scent of her shampoo, the familiar vanilla perfume she always wore, hit me like a wave of toxic gas. Every muscle in my body went rigid, but I forced my arms to come up and hug her back, patting her spine with a practiced rhythm. "Hey, God, I'm exhausted," I mumbled into her hair, desperate for an excuse to pull away. "You look beat, man," a voice called out from the hallway. Leo walked into the kitchen, a half-empty bag of tortilla chips in his hand. He was wearing a vintage Ohio State t-shirt that I had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. He gave me a relaxed, easygoing nod, his face entirely clear of guilt or hesitation. "How was the Buckeye State? You managed to lock down that contract?" Looking at him, the man I had called my brother, the man who had stood right next to me at the altar when I married the woman currently holding my hand, something inside me died completely. The pain was replaced by a strange, mathematical coldness. I looked at his eyes, looking for a twitch, a flicker of shame, but there was nothing. They were professionals at this. "Yeah, we got it done," I said, forcing a weary smile as I dropped my suitcase by the counter. "Just a lot of data dumping. I feel like my brain is fried. I'm probably just going to crash early tonight." "I'll make you some tea," Maya said instantly, her hand resting gently on my lower back. Go change out of your suit, babe. I walked upstairs, each step feeling slightly lighter than it had 2 days ago, because now I had an army behind me. That morning, before driving back, I had met with the private investigator Sheila Vance recommended. His name was Roy, a retired Chicago detective who looked like a tired high school football coach, but had the coldest eyes I'd ever seen. Roy had already cloned a digital footprint of my home network using the admin access codes I provided, and he had 2 vehicles stationed at the entrances of our subdivision. Over the next 10 days, I lived in a waking nightmare. I played the part of the clueless, overworked provider to absolute perfection. I ate dinner with them, watched movies with them, and even sat on the back patio drinking IPAs with Leo while he talked about his struggles to find a steady corporate gig. I listened to him complain about how hard it was to find loyal clients, keeping my hands deep in my pockets so he wouldn't see them curling into fists. Every night, I slept on the far edge of our king-sized bed, facing away from Maya, pretending to be fast asleep while my mind raced. I could feel the distance between us, a vast, frozen chasm, but she seemed completely oblivious to it, wrapped up in the thrill of her secret life. Then, on the second Monday, the first report from Roy arrived in a secure, password-protected email drop while I was at my office downtown. I locked my office door, drew the blinds, and opened the file. It was an incredibly meticulous, clinical documentation of my undoing. Roy hadn't just caught them, he had uncovered an entire shadow timeline. The affair hadn't started when Leo moved onto our couch 4 months ago. According to the text logs and location tracking data Roy's team had scraped from our shared family data plan, it had been going on for nearly a year. They had been meeting at a boutique hotel in downtown Naperville on Thursdays, under the guise of Maya visiting her sister. When Leo lost his contract and had his rent doubled, it wasn't a stroke of bad luck. It was a coordinated play. They had manufactured his financial crisis so I would willingly open the front door and invite him inside. They wanted to live together under my roof, funded by my salary, while I spent 50 hours a week traveling and managing corporate accounts to pay off the mortgage. The report included photographs, high-resolution, clear shots taken through the tinted glass of Leo's sedan parked in a secluded corner of a forest preserve 3 miles from our house. Shots of them walking hand-in-hand through an upscale grocery store in the next town over, laughing as Maya fed him a sample of cheese. And finally, the digital evidence. Hundreds of hidden, encrypted messages sent through a dummy photo calculator app on Maya's phone, which Roy's digital forensics guy had managed to intercept through our home Wi-Fi router's data packets. One message from Leo stuck in my throat like glass. He has no idea. He's out here grinding for the bonus while we get to build our life. I love you, M. Maya's response was sent 20 minutes later. He's a good provider, Leo, but he doesn't see me. Not like you do. Just a little longer until the refinancing clears and we can figure out the next steps. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning a quiet execution of my financial future. The refinancing they mentioned was a cash-out option we had discussed to remodel the kitchen, a move that would have pulled $50,000 of equity out of the house, money that Maya clearly intended to split or tie up in a lengthy legal battle once she filed for divorce on her own terms. I sat back in my desk chair, the glowing screen illuminating the dark room. The sheer scale of the betrayal should have broken me, but instead, it solidified into a heavy, impenetrable armor. They thought I was the stupid, reliable mule pulling the cart while they sat in the back enjoying the ride. They wanted a financial calculation. I was going to give them a math lesson they would never forget. I called Sheila Vance immediately. I have everything, I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. Photos, logs, timestamps, bank statements showing she opened a separate account 3 months ago, and proof that his financial crisis was fake. Excellent, Sarah said, and I could hear the sharp click of her pen through the receiver. Here's what happens next. We file the paperwork quietly tomorrow morning. We don't serve her at the house. We serve her somewhere public, somewhere where she cannot hide or make a scene, and we do it simultaneously with an eviction notice for Leo. No, I said, looking down at the photograph of them smiling in the forest preserve. I don't want to just serve them. I want to be in the room when the floor drops out from under their feet. I want them to look at me when they realize they have absolutely nothing left. Sarah paused for a moment, evaluating the risk. If you are present, you must remain completely calm. No shouting, no physical threats, no emotional outbursts.
If you lose your temper, it gives them leverage. Can you handle that? Sarah, I said, staring at my own reflection in the dark office window. I've been sitting across the dinner table from the man who ruined my marriage for 2 weeks while passing him the salt. I am the calmest man in this city. All right, she replied. We do it Friday afternoon. I'll arrange for a private courier to deliver the documents directly to your living room. Make sure they are both there.
Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that hung over the suburbs like a wet blanket. I pulled into the driveway at 2 p.m., having taken a half day from work. My heart was beating with a slow, deliberate rhythm, completely devoid of the panic that had consumed me weeks ago. I walked through the mudroom, dropped my laptop bag on the counter, and walked into the living room. They were both there, exactly as I knew they would be. Maya was curled up on the armchair with a book, and Leo was sitting at the dining room table, sketching something on his tablet. The house was quiet, the air conditioning humming its familiar, mundane tune. "Hey, you're home early," Maya said, looking up with a bright, easy smile. "Everything okay at the office?" "Everything is perfect," I said, walking over to the fireplace mantel and leaning against it. I didn't sit down. I wanted to remain standing, looking down at them. Actually, I asked a consultant to drop off some important paperwork for us today. It should be arriving any minute. Leo looked up from his tablet, his brow furrowing slightly at my tone. "Paperwork? For the kitchen remodel?" "Something like that," I replied smoothly. Right on cue, the front doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Maya started to get up, but I waved my hand. "I've got it." I walked to the front door, opened it, and accepted a thick, heavy manila envelope from a uniform-clad courier. I signed the electronic pad, closed the door, and walked back into the living room. I tossed the envelope onto the coffee table, right in front of Maya. It landed with a solid, definitive thud. "What's this?" Maya asked, her smile faltering slightly as she looked at the unmarked envelope. "Open it," I said. She reached out, her manicured fingers tearing open the tab. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I watched her eyes scan the top page. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," were printed in bold, stark lettering across the account. Right below it, stapled to the packet, was a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice addressed specifically to Leo. Maya's face drained of color so fast it looked like she had seen a ghost. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She flipped to the next page, and then the next. Attached to the back of the legal filings were dozens of high-resolution color photographs: the forest preserve, the grocery store, the boutique hotel in Naperville, and tracking sheets detailing every single dollar she had moved from her joint account into her secret savings. "Ethan, what is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking violently. Leo stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Hey man, what's going on?" He took a step toward the coffee table, reaching for the papers. "Don't touch them, Leo," I said. My voice wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It was dead, cold, and entirely empty. "Those don't belong to you. Nothing in this house belongs to you. In fact, you have exactly 30 days to remove every single piece of your garbage from my property, or the sheriff's department will do it for you." Leo stopped in his tracks, his eyes darting from me to the photographs scattered on the table. The smug, relaxed confidence he had carried for 4 months evaporated in a single second. He looked small. He looked trapped. "Ethan, Tweeve, let me explain," Maya sobbed, dropping the papers as tears began to stream down her face. She reached out toward me, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like. It was a mistake, I swear. We were just—" "A mistake?" I cut her off, a phantom of a smile touching my lips. "A mistake is buying the wrong brand of milk, Maya. A year-long affair is a lifestyle choice. Manufacturing a financial crisis to get your boyfriend onto my couch so I could subsidize his life while I worked 50 hours a week is a calculation." She froze, realizing in an instant that the entire lie had been completely unraveled. She looked at the photos of them hand in hand, the text logs printed out in black and white. There was no room left to gaslight me. There were no excuses left to make. "I know about the refinancing plan," I continued, looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. "I know about the separate bank account. My attorney has already frozen all joint assets pending the disclosure hearing. The down payment on this house came from my grandfather's inheritance before we were married, which means the core equity remains non-marital property.
You're going to get exactly what the law dictates, which, after we factor in the dissipation of assets for every hotel room and dinner you bought him with my money, is going to be significantly less than you think. Leo swallowed hard, his hands twitching at his sides. Ethan, bro, come on, we've been friends since college. We were friends, I said, finally letting a fraction of the burning venom inside me bleed into my tone. Until you walked into my home, ate my food, looked me in the eye, and slept with my wife in the bed I paid for. You are a parasite, Leo. And today, the host is done. I walked over to the mudroom, pulled my suitcase out from the closet, and set it by the front door. I wasn't going to stay there and watch them pack, and I wasn't going to sit in that poisoned house for another night. I had already booked an apartment in the city, close to my office. I turned back to look at them one last time. Maya was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders racked with violent, hysterical sobs. Leah was standing awkwardly beside her, staring at the floor, completely incapable of looking me in the eye.
The two people who had thought they were so clever, who had laughed at my ignorance while building a life on my dime, were completely broken, buried under the weight of their own deceit. "The locks are being changed tomorrow morning," I said quietly, my hand resting on the front door handle. "If either of you touches anything that isn't yours, the police will be waiting. Have a nice life." I walked out the front door, slamming it shut behind me. As I stepped out into the humid afternoon air and walked down the driveway to my car, the crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for the last 2 weeks finally lifted. The road ahead was going to be brutal, messy, and painful. But as I started the engine and drove out of the subdivision, looking forward at the open road, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally free.